America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation. When a failing school system claims it knows children better than parents, homeschooling's rise isn't radical. It's a rational response to an education and mental health crisis. In essence, I like to call it putting parents in charge. Joining us today is Holly Swenson. Holly is the author of the book Stop, Drop, Grow, and Glow, a registered nurse licensed in Montana, a wellness blogger, and a mother of four. She's worked in neuroscience nursing, served on local boards, and currently works in community and business development. While homeschooling three of her four sons, Holly, welcome to the show. You are very busy with four sons.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, life is full and busy, both.
Yeah, so this topic is very important to us at Job Creators Network. We do focus on small business issues, but education is so important because it is our next generation of job creators, of entrepreneurs, of workers, and reaching students, with the right lessons. Obviously, the typical, math and science and everything like that is important. But that is where we are going to have our next generation of leaders. And so I feel like this just came to such a head, the homeschooling issue came to such a head and really strengthened as a result of COVID. And I feel like, and I didn't do homeschooling for my kids, but I understood and knew people who did, and it was quite a quiet community. I feel like it's a very loud, dynamic community and that there's so much more there for parents.
Yeah, you're right. I think it definitely took off with COVID, right? Everyone started to have more pulse of, what was happening in the schools, but also really, I think, have enjoyed the flexibility of being able to learn and live in a way that's actually allowing their children to be happier, healthier, and have a little more freedom in what they get to do every day. And so, and it is, you're so right, homeschooling is on the rise, and it's actually become the fastest growing form of education. So, and you're seeing that across different diverse demographics, regions, and it really has become more of a normalized mainstream versus kind of this stereotype that we saw historically where, it wasn't the norm. And if you were homeschooling, it was a little more on the outs. So I think it is something people are embracing. And I think for good reason. I honestly have, we have three or four that you mentioned. And what was interesting for our family is that our children came to us and actually asked for the change. So over the years, we've tried on a little bit of everything, public, private, and then to have our children come and actually request it, we said yes without hesitation. And it's been really wonderful.
Well, at Job Creators Network, we are very supportive of parental empowerment and what we call education freedom. And we would love to see all 50 states pass universal education freedom. And we have worked with several states that have worked to do that. Tennessee last year passed universal education freedom. We worked directly with the governor on that, and so important. Iowa passed universal education freedom. Florida has it. Texas passed it. Some states have some varying degree of school choice, but that allows parents to decide homeschooling is where I want my kids, or I want my kids in parochial school, or I want my kids in some sort of alternative learning environment. And that's what we support, is the choice, and that parents get to make it. I saw the New York Times had an op-ed claiming that homeschool kids are not all right. What was your immediate reaction? Give us kind of a background on the op-ed and then what your immediate reaction was to some of the arguments made there.
Well, I think, just real briefly, in this piece, it calls for sweeping government oversight in regard to homeschool families. And ultimately, it concluded government knows better than parents when it comes to our children and how they should be educated. And, I have a lot of respect for everyone's different perspectives and everyone's had different upbringing. So, everyone's entitled to their own, belief. I believe that very, strongly. But I just think we have to be careful because I think in this piece, and it calls for an authority outside the home to protect children from their parents. That's when it's going a little bit too far. Family, I really do believe it needs to be family first. Like that's where the foundation comes from. So I think we have to be really careful to not overstep bounds, and not create these police states. And, I think there's a lot of amazing things that are happening in a lot of homes for those families who are choosing to homeschool. And, you have tricky things that are going to show up, in different homes, anywhere, whether kids are going to public school, private school, or homeschool. But I think we have to be careful and how we approach homeschool. And I am definitely for having freedom of choice. And we have so many resources in this day and age to really help support our families, help their children find curriculum that's going to help them be more engaged and more on board with what they're learning, how they're learning, and when they're learning.
What would be a better balance to this narrative in terms of I know you called it, policing homeschooling, but in terms of ensuring that children are getting the curriculum that they need within a homeschool environment, is there a better balance? Are there some states that are doing it better than others?
Well, each state does it a little differently. I will share for us, how we're meeting those requirements because I do believe in education and you want to keep your kids growing and thriving and learning. That's a very important piece. So we partner with an accredited online program, an academy, and what's amazing is it tracks all of the courses, it gives you modules, but you can complete this work in a fraction of the time that you would spend 8 hours at school. And so we're able to keep our kids engaged. They're meeting all those core classes. They have autonomy. If we want to be able to, for example, say go skiing in the morning, they can do their work in the afternoon. We have freedom to live and thrive and still meet these requirements to help them help themselves as they grow and continue into adulthood.
The not to be political in any way, but the teachers union is a very strong lobby in politics. Do you think that the threat that homeschooling poses to the teachers union has anything to do with sort of the arguments against homeschooling and the attacks that it continues to receive?
I'm not super well versed on, in terms of the school unions. So that's probably not my best zone of genius. But I mean, I'm sure, yes, that it does pose some kind of a threat. And what's interesting is if, it's actually expected that the enrollment in public schools is going to continue to decline. And so the forecast is that homeschool is in and that public school is starting to lose its edge. So I think we are in this time of change, of transformation. And with that can come, uncomfortable feelings. And I'm sure teachers are feeling a little unsettled with how things are starting to shake out. And probably there is some kind of emotion for regaining control over the situation. But I think the reality is families should be part of the educational process. And so there's a lot of families who don't have the opportunity to homeschool. So I think taking a balanced approach to school, to life, to all things is actually what's called for. So I think we just need to find the midline. I think we need to work together and, and hopefully things will shake out for the best for our young people and for our families.
I mean, my feeling and our feeling at Job Creators Network is these states that are passing universal education laws and allowing parents to decide if homeschooling or private school, parochial school, whatever works for their kids is the best place for them to learn. Our feeling is that more choices are better than just one choice, because if you are in a failing school and you don't have any choices, how's that going to help this child? How's that going to help this family in the future? And so our thought it always goes back to the free market, is that if we have the schools, the public schools, competing for those children to be in those seats, then we're going to get better schools across the board. We're going to have better homeschooling learning environments, better modules and online resources, which has been the result of COVID and parents saying no more. And we're going to have better private schools, parochial schools. We're going to have better public schools. And isn't that what we want? Isn't more choice going to create better quality education across the board?
I would sure think so. And I am with you. I mean, I think having choices that's where the magic lies. And if you actually look at what's happening in the public schools, government data shows only about a third of our children are even proficient in the core subjects. So that is pretty alarming. And you also have to look at some other factors that I think are really important to highlight. And that's that our children and adolescents are facing some of the worst mental health outcomes on record. And so I think this combination of our kids aren't even meeting, the benchmarks, and their mental and physical health has honestly never been worse. I mean, you look at diagnosed anxiety and depression. So they're at historic highs. About 1 in 6 of our teens have anxiety, and about 1 in 12 have diagnosed depression. You look at data from the CDC, and it shows that 21% of children ages 3 to 17 have a diagnosed mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral condition. So you look at what's happening to our children, and it's not all coming from public school, but children are spending many hours, of their youth in school. And so I think we really need to be careful with the environment that they're in, the food they're eating, the amount that they get to move and play, really helping them find more thrive and partnering with their purpose. I think there's a lot of bored children who aren't able to move enough, play enough, explore. And that's what, especially for our younger ages, what kids need. And they're not really getting those things. And then as a result, some of our young people are even being, medicated. You look at, how many children are receiving stimulant therapy for ADHD. And in public school, it's about 3.5 million kids, or 7 to 8%. So those are just some figures that I think are worth mentioning, because it's painting a picture of how our young people are doing, and it's not great.
How much do you think their access to social media while in school, and I don't necessarily mean while they're sitting in class, but in between classes, lunchtime, I mean, they have their phones with 24/7, but how much do you think social media plays into some of the mental health crisis that our kids are experiencing?
It's huge. Screens have been a huge contributor to anxiety, to depression, to this mental health decline. So phones and screens and social media are a huge problem. And I know a lot of schools are, making moves towards, no phones in the classroom, or you're, putting your phone away. But a lot of kids still have access to their devices, and it is definitely a tricky thing for parents, for school systems to navigate and to try to get a handle on. It is definitely not helping our young people.
Yeah, agreed. What do you know about or experience with on school co-ops? A friend of mine was part of one when her kids were younger, and ahead of the curve on getting her kids out of public school because she didn't like her school system. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they can be a great resource for families, especially for, for any children who maybe there's just like you have a single child, that having more community built in for the family, for the child to go and connect with other kids, because that can be one tricky thing to navigate. Like for us, we have a bunch of kids in our house, but they also still have a lot of friends. So they have a lot of hands-on time with other kids and with each other. But I think co-ops can be tremendous. We personally are not involved in any, but I know that there are a lot of homeschool resources and a lot of opportunities for homeschool kids to participate. And I also think it's worth mentioning that I know that the public schools do offer, sports and band and some other opportunities for homeschool kids, if that is something, if they don't have resources in their community for like a co-op, that I do know that is something that can be available for children, depending on where you live and what your school system looks like, but that there are opportunities outside of the home for kids to participate.
Yeah, I think that's great. You mentioned that your sons actually asked for homeschooling? What was going on that prompted them to make that request?
I think just the lack of inspiration, lack of inspiration. You look at what's happening in this, in classrooms. There's vaping epidemic. I think just the whole environment of school is not what it used to be. You have lockdowns. You have, there've been, threats of school shootings. There's a number of different issues that kind of came up, but I think they also just wanted the opportunity to be able to live and thrive on a higher level. And so my husband and I both really supported that. And it's not something that we pushed, but we wholeheartedly said yes to. And I will tell you, it has been one of the best decisions that we've ever made. And so helping them find and partner with things that bring them joy, like our oldest son, we actually have twins. So it's actually one of our twins. One's still in regular school and one's homeschooling, but he loves aviation. And so he's doing flight training, and he's able to do that because we do homeschool. And so by the time he graduates high school, he'll actually have his pilot's license. So that's just an example of how we're helping our children partner with things that bring them joy and success in their life. And I think too many children in this day and age aren't able to do that, finding their purpose, and they're kind of just getting stuffed into a box that's not the healthiest.
So that's interesting. You have one son in regular school and one son homeschooling. Do you, not to get you to criticize one or the other, but do you see a difference in the curriculum that you have any observations on what your son in the mainstream school is being exposed to that make you feel okay, or and you're comfortable with it, or you have some are you having parent teacher conferences when you see stuff come home and you're like, I don't want this?
I think I don't want to bring anyone down, but I think what I'll say is I'm underwhelmed by the public system. My one son is still there because he's very social. He loves his friends. And so that's kind of the thread that's holding him on. He's thought about doing homeschool, so it may shift at some point, but he really likes the social aspect of high school. And so we really want to have our kids be an active participant in their journey. And so we've let them help partner with some of those decisions. But one thing I love about the homeschool curriculum we use, for example, is there's a social emotional component to it. And so I think that's something that's really missing in the public school, teaching kids how to be good humans. I think that we need to bring a little more morality, a little more awareness, a little more compassion into what we're teaching our children. And I think that's something that is lacking in the public schools.
What was kind of your biggest challenge when you stepped outside the traditional school system that was surprising to you?
Well, I think there's always, I think in the back of your mind, the stereotype of like, oh, I think wrestling with some of the social, perhaps awkwardness of it, but honestly, not even like I'm to a point in life where that's not such a big deal. But I think there's always comparison. And I think we have heard, well, they're not getting, it's not academically rigorous enough when you're not in the regular school system. But when you look at what's happening in the regular school system, a lot of those kids aren't proficient. I mean, and so I think it's this thing of like, you have to just sometimes chart your own course in life. We have an academy that we're partnered with that we love. It gives us the ability to do things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And for us, it just feels like a no-brainer.
So just from a personal standpoint, my kids, when they were growing up, my youngest is in her senior year in college, and my oldest is a nurse. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording. But when I would help them with their homework at home, we tended to get frustrated with each other. Walk me through a day in the life of homeschooling and what that schedule looks like. And do you run into those frustrations of that parent-child that you can imagine I experienced when I was helping them with homework?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, yes, children definitely get frustrated. That's part of it. That's part of the the journey. But, for us, we usually wake up, we start classes around 8:30, and we work for about an hour and a half doing, and I do also weave in others. So we have this online curriculum, but we weave in art, we do some different writing and some different side projects. And then usually around 10:30, we go do something active. So, my oldest is driving. So sometimes he'll drive. They'll go hit the gym for an hour. We'll get out for a hike. We'll go just take a break. They'll take lunch, and then we do classes again. If we have anything left to complete, we'll do those for, an hour to an hour and a half in the afternoon. And, but what's been awesome is that, seasonally, if it's not hitting the gym, our kids have done some golf lessons. So they've been able to do that, or go mountain biking, or go, weave some of these other fun things into the day, all the while learning and meeting these marks. So that is a typical day. But yes, and when your kid's getting frustrated, I just say, give them 5 minutes to cool off, come back to it. Don't keep pushing, because, once someone's in that elevated state, they just need a few minutes to regain their composure.
Especially with math, right?
Yeah.
That's the class. That's the kicker.
That was the kicker for me back in the day, for sure.
Yeah. That's where both of us would get frustrated with each other, and it would be just go to your own corner. Each of us have to go to our own corners and cool off.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I think too, I want to mention too that, when you actually look at the data on homeschool, statistically, homeschooled students, they often show higher standardized test scores, better college readiness, improved social emotional well-being compared to the public school peers, and that they also have increased emotional resilience. So and I also want to add lower rates of mental health treatment and substance misuse. So there's definitely some positives that you see come out of families who choose to homeschool, and that homeschool grads show stronger college outcomes. So about 74% pursuing higher education compared to only 44% of public school grads pursuing higher education.
Those are really strong stats. Those are great stats. And you get this time with your kids too. I mentioned mine are almost, the second one is almost done with college, so virtually grown. And you can't get back that time. And so the time you're spending with them is so valuable because it goes so quickly. Your book, Stop, Drop, Grow, and Glow, focuses on a deeper, more joyful connections with children. How does that philosophy show up in your homeschooling life?
Well, my work is really, so I really try to promote more wellness, intentionality, and joy. And, I've created this framework to help parents move from surviving to thriving. And a lot of that comes with you doing work as a parent to come to the table every day in a grounded, kind, compassionate way. So that doesn't mean you don't set boundaries, that you don't, but it's firm and kind. So it's learning how to, I think, essentially take care of yourself. Daily self-care is a huge part of that, especially for parents, for caregivers. I think we have to start reframing self-care as, I think historically we've thought of it as being selfish. I really promote it being an essential basic that needs to be tended to every day. Like if you want to show up, if you want to take on homeschooling, for example, you need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself so that you are showing up as the parent you're proud to be. And I think for so many of our parents out there, they're running on empty. And so if you're showing up irritable, burnt out, your children receive your nervous system. So you have to be really careful. So a lot of the work I promote is really rooted in self-awareness, upping your self-consciousness, and being the best person that you can be for yourself and for your children.
For parents who feel stuck and frustrated with their current learning environment for their kids, whether it's public school or somewhere else, what is your advice to them on how they can step outside that traditional learning environment?
Well, a great place to start just to get information, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, they work really hard to, work towards helping there be more freedom for people who do want to take on homeschool. I would also research your local state. Each state does it a little differently. So if you are curious about homeschool, look at what the parameters are for your state, because they're not the same across the board. And just have good conversation with your family. Sit down and ask your children, how are you doing? Ask yourself, how am I doing? And then you need to create a plan, create a framework that's ultimately going to help everyone live their best lives. I mean, we should be living our best lives, and so many of us are just barely surviving. So you have the power to shape your reality, but you do have to start taking actionable steps towards those things.
I think that's good advice. Holly, your book is Stop, Drop, Grow, and Glow, Forming Deeper, More Joyful Connections with Yourself and Your Children. Where can listeners find your book?
Yeah, you can find my book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you buy your books. It's also available on Audible and anywhere you buy your audiobooks. And then I also want to just mention real quick, I just launched an online course that actually stems from this award-winning framework. It's called Glow Forward, Parenting with Presence and Purpose. And you can find that on my website, which is liveyourglow.live.
Say that website one more time.
liveyourglow.live.
Love it. Love it. Well, Holly, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we will be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.